Like you, I was thoroughly enjoying the singing of our young people, singing with great hearts of love for the songs that they were singing. When we got to the idea of Row the Gospel Chariot Along, I couldn't help but think toward the beginning, I can't remember whether it's if the brother's in the way, we will stop and pick him up, sister in the way, sinner in the way, and then of course the last one, if the devil's in the way, we're rowing right over him. But I actually thought that I imagined one of the church members saying, if the brother's in the way, we'll row right over him. Which brings up my lesson today, let brotherly love continue. You know, it's a terrible thing to think that sometimes some people even perceive the impossibility that we can love one another. In an unusual way, this past Wednesday evening, I introduced our overview of 1 Corinthians chapter 13 by reminding what Paul would have said, or Timothy would have said, about Paul writing to them about the way that they had to love one another in spite of their differences of opinion. I'm afraid sometimes some people just seem to be somewhat cantankerous when it comes to this idea that not only is it a commandment of God, or that it's more than just a suggestion, that it's a commandment that we are to love one another, as the writer of Hebrews 13 suggested. And just like Paul would say in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, the problem that the church there had at Corinth, that he had spent 18 months with, and this writing back now to them, is you've got strife and division. You can't get along with one another. You can't agree on matters of doctrine, and you're certainly having problems with matters of opinion. And the point that he was making in chapter 12 is, look, you all belong to one another. It's not that I'm a member here and you're a member there and we're all members all scattered around. It's you're one body, is what Paul said in that passage. And if one member suffers, all of you suffer. And every part of that body is important. It's not of any insignificance at all. And just like in this audience today, every one of you that's a member of the congregation here at Lincoln or wherever you worship, you're not insignificant. You may feel that way. And sometimes people may make you feel that way. But biblically speaking, the fact of the matter is we all are to matter one to each other. That's why Paul would say there in Ephesians chapter 4 that they were to get along with each other and beyond even just that. I beseech you to have a walk worthy of the calling with which you're called, lowliness and gentleness, with long-suffering, bearing with one another in love, endeavoring then to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. In order for the church to function, in order for any congregation to get along with, to accomplish things for the Lord, we've got to practice brotherly love. And as I said before, it is a command. A new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another, even as I have loved you, that you love one another. I mean, Jesus calls it that. It's a commandment. It's not a suggestion. It's not a variable. It's something that we are to do. In 2 Peter chapter 1, as he's given us those wonderful Christian graces, he reminds, or add to your godliness brotherly kindness, and to brotherly kindness love. In that passage, he uses two different kinds of Greek words. Phileo, the brotherly love. Philadelphia, the city of love. And then the agape love, a love that looks out for the other individuals without ever thinking about self. And you do that rationally, and you do that without emotion because it's the right thing to do. As we said Wednesday night, it has nothing to do with the person's worthy or not. It has everything to do with the person extending that love. That's what Peter here is saying in that passage, and what Paul said, and what the writer of Hebrews 13 is saying. We understand that God would never command us, never tell us to do something that would be impossible for us to do. So what's this thing about brotherly love? Let brotherly love continue. First of all, the writer of Hebrews, whoever he may have been, knew that brotherly love could be seen. Listen to what he says here. For God is not unjust to forget your work and your labor of love, which you have shown toward his name. Do you hear what the writer's saying? Sorry, this thing's making noise. It's not. Let me see if I can do a better job there. Okay. Which you have shown in his name. How that you've ministered to the saints and do minister. In other words, whatever they were doing, whatever the church that he was referring to was doing, it was evident to everyone that you're practicing brotherly love. You see, every congregation of the Lord's church that is striving to do this very thing, it's very evident that you're doing that. This past week, I wish, and as I said before, you're with me when I go, but I wish you could have met some of the brethren that we met up in Delaware. The congregations there are few and far between. Some 15 or 20. In fact, one of the ministers that was visiting there said, I have one of the most unique, as a minister, I have one of the most unique situations that I can possibly, any preacher can ever make. And I said, what? What's that? He said, tomorrow morning when I go worship with the saints at this particular place, when he mentioned it, he said, I will have 100% attendance. I said, 100% attendance? I said, that's something else. He said, yes, all 15 of us will be together. 15. And yet they meet regularly every Sunday and every Wednesday. The congregation at Laurel was about 70, 75. They probably had 85 or so there last Sunday for those services because they had brethren from other places that came and spent the night to be there for the workshop. But it was just very obvious that these people were so hungry to be with people of like precious faith. This is a compliment to you. They would eat you folks up. They would just enjoy so much to be around folks in the Deep South. And no, they never made fun of my accent at all. Never asked me to say a word that, or a phrase. They introduced me to scrapple. You'll have to find out. Go look that up in the dictionary. I didn't know what scrapple was until I got there. It's interesting. It's a food, to say the least. But you see, it's evident when people come together whether these people are in love with one another. That's the point. It's something that can be seen. And the point of the matter is that not only can we see it, but the most important thing is the world can see it. Remember there in John 13:34, a new commandment that I give to you, that you love one another, even as I've loved you, that you love one another. By this, the world will know that you have love one to each other. The world will know that. In the world of the first century, and that's true of the world of the 21st century. When folks out there see us living and loving the way we're supposed to love, Jesus says the world will see that. We usually think that 1st and 2nd Peter is written toward the end of Peter's life. If we date his death around 66, 67, 68, no more than 69, or it had to be 68 AD because of Nero and his death around the 68 AD. But he's writing through inspiration of the Spirit. Listen to what he says in 1 Peter chapter 2. Beloved, I beg you as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul, having your conduct, that is your manner of life, honorable among the Gentiles. Now notice why. that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may, by your good works which they observe, glorify God in the day of visitation. And then the admonition, therefore submit yourselves to every ordinance of men for the Lord's sake, kings and supreme governors to those who are sent by him for punishment of evildoers, for the praise of those who do the same. And then notice verse 17, honor all people, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. Peter, what are you trying to say? Peter's saying, I'm trying to get you to realize that by your manner of life toward each other, you're preaching a sermon to those on the outside. And you see, folks, today in our stressed out world that everybody's got to take a position about this or that and the other, the only thing that will impress people on the outside who have no love lost or any love for any kind of religion, they'll be impressed by that kind of thing. That's the number of scriptures that tell us to one another. Acts chapter 4, they had all things in common. Early church in Jerusalem, they sowed what they had to help others. Romans 12, verse 10, in brotherly love, have affection for one another. Be exceptional toward each other in preferring one another. Galatians 5, through love, serve one another. Philippians 2, 1 and 2, have this mindset, having the same love and accord for each other. Be of one mind toward each other. Colossians chapter 2 and verse 2, that your hearts may be encouraged, being knit together in love. 2 Thessalonians 1, 3, that your faith grows exceedingly because of the love that you have for every single one of you. Is somewhat the translation there. Paul, what are you saying? Love's not an option. Love is a commandment. And it's something that's going to be seen by others around you. But also, what does brotherly love do for us? You see, without love, we're going to be lost and others around us are going to be lost. Obviously, John is called the apostle of love simply because of the number of times that he talks about love for each other. Listen to John, 1 John chapter 2, 9 and 10. He who says he's in the light and hates his brother, he is in darkness until now. He who loves his brother abides in the light, and there is no cause for stumbling in him. Chapter 3 and verse 10. In this the children of God and the children of the devil are manifest, that is, are made clear. Whoever does not practice righteousness is not of God, nor is he who does not love his brother. And then again in verse 14, we know that we pass from death to life because we love the brethren. He who does not love his brother abides in death. And then notice also verse 14 as well, the same admonition, as well as in chapter 4, verses 7 and 8. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. He who does not love does not know love, or does not know God, for God is love, as we sang the beautiful song a few moments ago. What's the point? You can't have love for God unless you have love for each other. You see, brotherly love, as it were, encapsulates all the issues and all the challenges of life. For those of you who have been members of this congregation for a long time, you know that there have been people that have been here that are no longer here. In fact, they're no longer anywhere because they've allowed hatred and bitterness and ugliness to just, as it were, encapsulate their heart to the point that they just don't go to church anywhere. And unless they change, they will die that kind of way. And what Paul and others were saying, and what John was saying is, look, this has got to be a continual thing. You know, brotherly love takes care of the weak individual. Galatians chapter 6, brethren, if a man be overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one. Bring him back. The original language means like that of a broken bone. You set it back in place. You put it back together again, considering yourself lest you also be tempted or be discouraged. And then bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. At the end of our service Sunday, or I guess it was Saturday, one of the men that had been a member, had been a minister for that congregation in years earlier and now was preaching elsewhere, but he was there for the workshop. He had told Donna and I that this workshop could not have come a better time because their son, who had died about 7 years ago, the death anniversary was last Monday. And he said, my wife and I are still having problems over that sudden, horrific loss that we did not expect in any kind of way. But they asked him to lead the closing prayer for that workshop that particular day. All of us had tears coming out of our face as he was talking about the love for each other and the love for God and the appreciation for this kind of information to be given to him and to his wife and to everyone else there that was hurting in one kind or the other. He later on told his older son, his adult son, I wish I had known and heard this 20 years ago. Because both as a minister as well as a father, he knew what pain was all about. And what the scriptures say is that when we deal with someone that's hurting, someone that's weak, someone that's discouraged, someone that has a pain loss, a grief loss, we're to love them and take care of them. And even in regard to Scripture, 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 14, Paul says, look, if there's a troublemaker among the church, you mark that individual and you watch out for him. But then verse 15, yet do not count him as an enemy, but admonish him as a brother. Now, did you get that? Here's a guy that's perhaps causing trouble in the church at Thessalonica. Paul said, well, we know he's a troublemaker, but remember, he's your brother. And you do that with a tender kind of love and respect that you have for God and for the church. It is possible that brotherly love can perish. And you're saying, well, how is that possible? Well, if we don't let it continue, then it's going to stop. That's the very admonition of that passage of Hebrews 13. We want it to continue. Now, how do you make that do? How do you make that happen? Well, we've got to be sure that we avoid getting tired and weary of dealing with people. Galatians chapter 6, 9 and 10. Let us not be weary in doing well. Let's look for every opportunity to do good, especially those of the household of faith. Let's admit it. Sometimes as human beings, we may get tired of people's junk. We're all human. We all want them to know better. We all want them to do better. We all want them to grow up. We all want them to become more mature. We want them to start centering on the more important things of life instead of the lesser important things. We can come up with all kinds of lists. But here's Paul in Galatians, who has problems with brethren that have called him all kinds of names and treated him disrespectfully as one of God's apostles, holy apostles. And yet through inspiration, Paul says what? Let's not get discouraged. Let's keep on doing the right thing. Sadly, love for others can fail. It can stop. And when that happens, the end result can be fatal. Remember 2 Timothy chapter 4? Verse 6 through 8, Paul had already given that great declaration of, I've kept the faith, crossed the finish line, finished the race. And then Paul says, but Demas has forsaken me, having loved this present world. And he's departed. What happened to Demas? And then we don't know. Because the prior times that we read his name, he is actively involved in the work of the church and missionary points wherever Paul and Luke and Silas and others were. All we can do is take what Paul says at face value, having loved this present world. Thus the admonition in 1 John chapter 2, love not the world, nor the things which be of the world. And then he goes on, for all that's in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, pride of life, that's not of the Father, it's of the world. And those things are passing away. But he who loves and does the will of God will abide forever. As I said a few moments ago, there are people from this church that used to worship here or any other congregation in the entire community the same way. They used to be zealous. They used to be on fire for the Lord. They used to be faithful. They used to be consecrated. And they've allowed the way of the world, they've allowed the hatred, the bitterness, the whatever else you can say to get in their way of service to God. And not only will they leave the church, but they will leave the Lord and have a terrible end when this life is over. So I guess the question to ask is this: will I ever quit loving you as brothers and sisters of the Lord? And I hope every single one of us in this audience today, whether you're a member here or somewhere else, will say in your heart and mean it in your life, no, not ever. I will never let anything get in my way of loving each other because I love God. Because ever if I get to that point, my love for the Lord can't be there. You cannot, as John said, you cannot say you love God when you despise your brother, your sister. In order for brotherly love to continue, it's got to continue in each one of us. Every one of us make an affirmation every single day in every kind of way that we're going to love each other and help each other get to heaven. That means everyone, not just the ones that we're most comfortable with, or the ones that are just like our age, or the one in our socio-economic, everyone. If you think about it, folks, the Lord loved everybody and died for all the world. The Lord did not show any differentiation of anybody, any social class, any color, any race, nothing, gender, nothing. He died for everyone. If the Lord's willing to do that, then what about us? Why not us? If you did respond to the Lord's invitation, we invite you to come. Let's go. We stand and sing.